Hello, everyone, and welcome to Flourish Painters. This is the fourth edition. We're doing wildflowers today. My name is Jen Korolenko. We'll get started in about 5 minutes. But in the meantime, just so you know, today you will need a ballpoint pen of some kind with black ink. So if you don't have one handy, now would be the time to scrounge one up and have it handy for the final touches to our wildflower paintings today. Also a reminder that your screen should be on speaker view as opposed to gallery view, just so you will see my tutorial in full screen rather than in just my little square. Okay, we'll get started in like 5 minutes. Yes, a micron pen will work fine. Any black ink pen will do. All right, everyone. Hi, I am Jen Korolenko. This is Flourish Painter Series. We are on the 4th edition. This week we'll be painting Wildflowers. I'm Jen Korolenko. I'm the Curator of Education and Public Programs for the Forsyth Galleries at Texas A&M University Art Galleries Department. And I will be teaching this class today. As I mentioned a couple of minutes before, some of you may have not heard when you were logging in, but today we will need a black pen of some kind, whether that's a felt tip pen or a ballpoint pen. Either one will work, but we are going to add details to our wildflowers using some ink methods to use sort of an illustrative technique in the end. You also will need the generalized supplies. You'll need water, 2 cups, one for cleaning and one for adding, washing your brushes, and one for adding clean water to your palette. You'll need your watercolor paints, of course, and round pointed brushes in a few different sizes. I have a number 12, a number 10, and a number 6 today. I have a watercolor pen as well, which is about a number 6, but I probably won't be using that too much. I also recommend having paper towel handy just to blot your colors as we move on through the tutorial. If you have any questions throughout the event, or the demonstration rather, please just type them into the chat, and I've set an alarm for about 6 minutes before the class is to end. That way I can answer any of your questions during that time. Otherwise, let's just have some fun and relax and paint some wildflowers. Now, when painting watercolor, one of the most important things that you can do is establish a palette to begin. So I'm going to get my little example out of the way, and I'm going to grab my watercolor paper. This is 140-pound cold press paper from Canson. This is the paper that was provided to you through Flourish if you received one of the kits through them. And you also will be using the 8-pan Prang semi-moist watercolors. I'm using a bit of a larger pan. I can give you a link to this one if you'd like. Just make sure to email me. I'll put my email in the chat when we're almost done. This is a 48 color half pan set. This is just from Amazon. It's in a nice tin container, and the colors are pretty nice and pigmented. This is just kind of an upgrade since I've been watercolor painting so much recently. And anytime that you get a new watercolor set, it is helpful for you to do a demo sheet like this one. This one was actually included with the watercolor set, which is super handy. So it gives you the colors in order that they appear in your palette, and it's your job just to test them out so you can see what colors you're pulling as you go. And this is only something you're going to need to do if you're working with a very large palette like I am right now, just because the colors don't always appear like they do in the pan, like they would on the paper. So this is a really handy trick to use when you're getting an upgrade to your watercolor supplies. So you can use cold pressed or hot pressed paper. It really doesn't matter. It's a personal preference. With the wildflowers that we're doing today, they're going to be kind of wispy and have long stems and leaves and things like that. So we're going to start by mixing up a green, and I'm going to do my mixing on top of my watercolor block just so you all can see it. And I'm going to start in with a royal brush. This is a number 10 brush. Again, this is a round pointed brush, and I'm just going to pick up some water from one of my jars that I have just out of view here, and I'm going to add that to my palette. Now, I was working obviously a bit earlier, so I'm just kind of refreshing some of the color that's already here. You can start from scratch, but I'm going to take a green. This is a grass green from my palette, and just kind of really pick up a great deal of this color. So I'm just kind of scrubbing the pan to pick up the pigment. And this is a little too grassy for me, so I'm going to wash off my brush and blot it on the paper towel, re-wet it, and I'm actually going to pick up a little bit of a red color and drop that in. And I'm also going to pick up some brown and mix that in just so we have a nice muted, mossy kind of green hanging out here. To start with, I'm going to go ahead and wash that brush. I'm going to think of what colors I want to use for my first set of wildflowers. We're going to do 3 different stems today. So you're going to want 3 different colors. So let's say I want to start with kind of a purpley color. So I'm grabbing some of this beautiful Egyptian blue from my palette. I'm going to rinse that quickly. And I'm going to pick up some of this deep red. So now I kind of have a beautiful violet color here. Set that aside. Now I want a pink. So I'm going to grab some of this corally color. A little bit of that bright red. Rinse my brush. I'm going to pick up a bit of yellow. So now we have an orangey color, which will appear peach when we put it on the paper. We're adding the appropriate amount of water. I'm going to wash my brush once more. And I'm going to mix up kind of like a dusty blue color. So I'm going to go right back into that Egyptian blue because I'm kind of obsessed with it right now. Like a kid with a new toy. Get some of that on my palette. And I'm going to add a little bit of white. But if you don't have white, you could just add extra water. And then I'm also going to add a little bit of this like mustardy yellow color. So now I kind of have a cornflower blue up here. One other color that you might want handy is a nice rich yellow. So I'm going to grab some of that from the pan, even though I mixed it with green. Go back in and just continue to add more yellow, maybe some orange. And just make a really nice pigmented sunflower yellow. Okay. Now, the great part about doing this is you don't have to worry about anything drying out if you're putting it on your palette, because like you saw in the beginning, you will be able to refresh it with just a bit of water if it does dry out. So don't panic if you see things drying up on you. It's not a big deal. So I'm going to move this to the side. And I am going to begin by using my number 6 royal brush. Okay. So white works like black. They just add a little bit of tone to the color. White will usually kind of make it a little bit more muted if you do have it. If you look at my color page here, when I put white on the paper, if you can get really close, it almost looks kind of like an eggshell when you put it on the paper. It's not necessarily something that you would use by itself. It's generally not something I use by itself, but it is something that I will add to colors to make them a bit more muted, because I have a tendency to make my watercolors very, very pigmented. And so it's part of having a bit of restraint on my end. So that is why you would use white. So I'm going to wet my brush. And I'm going to just dip it in that green that I mixed up. For demonstration purposes today, I'm going to make all of the stems the same color. That way we're not having to mix up things over and over again. We'll add some more pigments to this later to add detail. And I'm going to start by just drawing a line. I'm using just the tip of the brush. So I'm going to, in one long stroke, make one long line just like that. And then I'm going to decide where my buds want to come out. Now, these aren't any particular kind of wildflowers. They're kind of like weeds, basically, that would pop up in your garden. Sometimes they're called wax flowers or baby cosmos. There's a couple of different names for this type of bud that pop up and grow in the wild. But for our purposes, we're just kind of going to play and make these nice long stalks of buds. That way we're creating sort of a composition on our paper. So let's see, we would just, maybe one is there, maybe one is there, maybe one is there, maybe one is there, and then one toward the bottom. Now don't worry if this looks sloppy so far. Honestly, it does not matter. We're going to clean it up, and there's going to be several steps to make this more cohesive. But this is kind of just a structure for us to follow to start out. So I'm going to start out with this pretty orangey peach color that I mixed up. And I am going to make a U shape. And from the U shape, I'm going to start at the bottom with just the tip of my brush and push up. And push up, and push up, and push up. Again, making a U shape, push up, and this is using the point of the brush and the belly of the brush. So you want to use the point of the brush to start and then gradually press down so you're getting more of a thick line. So again, a U shape, tip to belly, tip to belly, tip to belly. Another U shape, tip to belly, like that. And I kind of want a raw edge on these, so I'm not worried about really defining the edges of these particular blooms for now. But once I have the general shape in there, I'm going to pick up color straight from my palette, and that's again the orangey color that we started out with. And I'm going to kind of drop that in to the bottoms of these buds and kind of drag the color up a bit to create a little bit of a tonal difference. Like that. I'm going to wash my brush, and now I'm going in with water, clean water only. I'm dipping it in the water, and then I'm dabbing it on my paper towel because you don't want it to be too wet, but I'm going to ease these transitions a bit with just that water. That way we're not getting too harsh of a line on our flowers to start. Now, to add some more dimension to these, we might want to go into our palette and let's make our camera focus. There we go. Go into our palette and grab some, there we go. I don't know what's going on with my camera. Grab some deep red kind of tones right out of the palette. And again, I'm just going to drop that in just by touching it to the bottom of the buds and letting it bleed into the flower. Now, if you're new with us this week, this is a technique called wet into wet. We're going to do a combination of wet into wet and wet into dry, just meaning that we are going to lay down our initial layers of color with some blending like so. And then we're going to let them dry and go back and add details. So you can see that transition here as we start out. Let's see if I can get the camera closer so it's not constantly refocusing. Got a new tripod, guys. I'm so excited. All right, better. Much better. Okay. So these little buds are looking kind of lonely. So let's add some leaves. I'm just washing off my brush. I'm going to go back into that green that we made the stem with. Dip it in the color, but then lightly touching it to my paper towel. So I'm getting some of the pigment off. And I am going to start to add some leaves. Now, leaves for wildflowers tend to be long and skinny or kind of spiky. So we're going to use the tip of the brush again, and then I'm slowly flattening it, and then I'm picking up to make an edge. So we have a leaf there. And then I'll show you that technique again. So with the tip of my brush, I'm slowly pushing down, and then towards the end, I'm picking up pressure. And you can do it the opposite way too, where you're starting at the top, going down, picking up pressure. Let's see. To make little leaves, they're much more simple. I'm just doing tiny little lines. If you make a little mistake, that's fine. You can just put a bud there if it gets misformed or formed not to your liking. And you can add a few little spiky kind of deals to your stalk or your stem here. Maybe there's a bud coming off this way. And a bud is just a line with a little egg shape on the end, like so. And that's something that hasn't quite bloomed yet. So I'm going to let that sit, and we're going to add more details once it dries. So we're going to move on to the next flower in our little composition here. I'm going to need a bit more green, so I'm going to pick up more of that grass green and add it to the color that's already on my palette. Any green you have will do. Again, to make it that nice mossy color, we're going to add warm colors like reds, browns, yellows, and oranges. Any kind of combination of those colors will do, totally up to you. And I'm just mixing on my palette as we go. We add a little bit more of a darker color. And just a touch of red. There we go. So I have that loaded up on my number 6 brush, and I'm going to start on the second stalk here. But rather than draw the stem first, I'm going to draw the part of the flower that is underneath that it blooms from. And you'll see what I'm talking about in a second. So again, we're going to draw a U shape like so. And just cap it and fill it in. Just like that. And use the tip of your brush to kind of manipulate the pigment. Then I'm going to say another flower is going to be over here. So I'm going to make another egg shape with a little bit of a cup on top of it. A rim, a cup. That is not a these are not technical terms. Like so. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here, kind of a U shape. I'm going to pick up a little bit of water and blot it. Like so. Let me get a little sharper at the edges there. And then your flowers are actually going to sit inside of these little cups that we created. So go ahead and wash your brush and decide which color you want to use next on your palette. I think I'll use this pretty purple color that I mixed earlier. So I'm going to add a little bit of water to it, pick up some color, dip it in the water, and then dab it on your paper towel. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go inside that with the U shape like so. And just like we made the leaves before, we're going to now make flower petals like so. So using the tip to start in a U shape. And dragging your pigment up. Now you might want to pull some out like that so you have more of a fuller flower. I do that with the other one here. Got a U shape. And then I'm just filling in the little basket that we created, essentially. So your darker tones are usually going to be at the bottom of your flower. So you can always pick up more pigment and drop that into the bottom while it's still wet. You want to work while it's wet, of course, for right now. Get those beautiful seamless color transitions. And this creates a bit of dimension as well. I'm just washing my brush. And now I'm going to go in with the stem. So I'm going to pick up that pretty green that we made earlier, lightly touch it to my paper just to blot. And I'm going to start with this guy here because he's at the top of our page. And just drag a line all the way down. And then this guy is connected there. This guy is connected there. And then we want some leaves and buds on here too. We also want to make the texture of the stem a bit more wispy. Because again, these are going to be flowers that you would see on the side of your road or growing out of the sidewalk. I'm just using the same green to darken some areas. Now, if you put too much pigment in one area, don't worry about it. You can go ahead and grab just a little bit of your paper towel and ball it up and just kind of touch it to the area where you've created a bit of a puddle. And this creates some highlights for us as well. So I'm going to go in. I've added a bit more of a reddish color into my green to make kind of like an army green. And I'm going to go ahead and continue to manipulate those colors and add some more leaves to our stem. And maybe some bigger ones live here too. And I'm just kind of letting the shape that my stem ended up being sort of dictate the layout of my composition here. So yours might not look exactly like mine, but that is okay. These kind of long and twisted pieces really add a lot of depth and interest to our flowers. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and wash my brushes. We're going to let this hang out for a while and dry while we work on our third stalk. Now this one is the most challenging. It kind of looks like, we're doing this one for reference, this one here. The shapes are all ones that we've already used in this tutorial. We are just altering them and kind of making them larger to start out with. So we're going to start out by making those big yellow orangey centers here. I'm going to dip into my yellow that I mixed up earlier and just refresh it a little bit. And this is going to be a very bright saturated yellow. And I'm going to pick an area to have my biggest bloom from this particular flower. And I'm going to do a little arch shape like so. Like a little gumdrop. Then I'm going to wash off my brush and I'm just going to have water on it again. And I'm going to work in little circles to bring my pigment into the center. Now to add texture to that shape, what I'm going to do is, without adding water or without adding pigment, I'm going to take the tip of my round brush. I'm working with a number 10 currently. If you're working with a 6, that's fine too. Use whatever you have. But I'm just going to use the very, very tip of the brush while my paint is still wet and pull out little spikies. Now, if you need to move your paper around to do this, please feel free. I'm trying not to, just so everything stays in frame. And then this guy has a little friend over here. It's the center of the flower, and then I'm going to use that tip again to pull out the little spikies to create texture. Those are going to come in handy later. Again, if you have puddles, you can use paper towel or you can use a dry brush to kind of soak up the pigment. Just a little bit. Now, through process of elimination, what I mixed up in the beginning, these flowers are going to be blue. Maybe they're not blue in nature. Does it really matter? Not so much. So I'm going to go into that pretty blue color that I mixed up earlier, that sort of cornflower color, and get that all over my brush and then tap it on my paper towel. And we're going to create those leaf shapes, but going downward. So we're going to start at the top when we're pushing down and then lift up when we get towards the bottom. Again, on the other side, we're pushing down, lift up towards the bottom. We'll do a few more. Push down, lift up, push down, lift up. Use the tip of your brush to manipulate and finish off any edges you might like to do. Push down, lift up, push down, lift up, push down, lift up. I'm adding a little bit more pigment to my brush, pushing down, lifting up, pushing down, lifting up, and then using that brush to encourage the pigment to go where I want it to. Watercolor wants you to think that you are not in charge, but you are. So maybe that looks good. This is a little, looks like it's a little wind blown, but that is completely okay. And that is part of the look that we're going for. I kind of like the way this is looking currently. And we're gonna have a little bit of overlap here, which is exciting. We haven't done that so far. So I'm just picking up more pigment than I normally would. I'm not blotting as much off. And I'm gonna start where it is driest, which is down here. I'm going to push down and pull up, push down, pull up, push down, pull up. And then I am going to rotate my paper So I can then push down and pull up, push down, pull up, push down, pull up. And I'm going to pull down these other petals to sort of exaggerate the shape. And I just want this flower that's in the foreground to be darker than the one that's in the background. And the way I'm doing that is I'm just using more of the pigment straight from my palette. And I'm not worried about making individual petals so much, because we'll use pen and ink later to define them a bit more. But I kind of like the way that they're intersecting like that. So I'm going to go ahead and wash my brush. And the centers of the flowers are not necessarily going to be this bright, bright yellow. So I'm going to go into kind of a brownish orangey color. So I'm mixing a little bit of orange and a little bit of brown. Brown did not want to pick up. Getting that on my brush and blotting it. And then I'm going to start to drop that into the bottom of these centers, like so. Then I'm going to wipe the pigment off my brush, so it's kind of a dry brush at this point. And I'm working in little circles to add some dimension to that. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and wash my brush. And then I'm going to take my smaller brush, which is the number 6, and I'm going to get some water on that. And I'm going to mix up a little bit more green. We're using a good amount of green today, and I'm going to plop my green straight out of the pan into the orangey color that I just dropped into the centers of those flowers, because we're going to work smarter, not harder. And that was already like a brownie orange. Brownie, that's not a word. I mean, it is a word, but you know what I mean. Okay, so I'm going to figure out where the stem of this flower would be. So kind of imagine, pardon me, kind of imagine the center of the flower here, and then kind of go in between. And this guy is going to be significantly more bent than the other one. So this is 2 flowers overlapping rather than one stalk of the flower. So again, I'm going to start at the center and kind of make an imaginary line. And pull it out that way. And now the petals, the leaves for these particular flowers are kind of long and skinny and grow in bunches. So I'm going to do little bunches of 3 in a few different places. 1, 2, 3. Then using the tip of my brush to sort of define that. 1, 2, 3. Maybe that one's more skinny. Let's do one down here. And then let's do some little wispy guys to add additional texture to the stem. And these are just really quick little brush strokes using just the tip of your brush. I'm gonna drop in some pure pigment in the bottoms of these leaves and drag it up just a bit, like we've been doing with our petals. If your shape gets lost a little, no biggie. You can fix it later. And we're just all about layering color today. want that to be a little thicker at the bottom. Kind of just let the paint do its thing. Like watercolor is one of the few mediums where you really don't have that much control over the final product. Like you can learn the techniques and all of that stuff and learn how to use the medium properly to get the best results, but you are still going to have incidents that you're going to have to work with in your paintings because there's no erasing in watercolor painting. So for now, we have these 3 lovely little stems of wildflowers to start off with. I'm going to wash my brush and we're going to check to see if by now your first 2 should be dry already, which is nice. I'm going to wash the brushes that I've been using and blot them. And I'm just kind of going to take a look at this particular arrangement that I have here and decide where I want to add some more details. So we've got these beautiful peachy little buds here. I'm going to take a really fiery kind of orange color, which you can add a bit of yellow to red to get. I'm going to load that up on my brush, but you can use any color that's darker. And I'm going to sort of create petals or define petals with this color. Really any color that has a great deal of contrast, but is still in the same tone family. And by that, I mean, if you made pink flowers, you're going to want to use a warm color. If you made blue flowers, you're going to want to use a cool color. That's all. We want to keep our warms and our cools together. Maybe this one's a little less, like so. And this is going to add some dimension. Maybe we even have a few petals that come out like that. Okay. And then I'm going to take my skinny little number 6 brush and I'm going to mix up a nice deep green. Using a deep green, but I'm also going to add some dark brown to this. Ooh, that's purple. That's why you use your color guide. I almost prefer painting with a smaller palette because you have so much more control. These colors are great. Don't get me wrong. Like it's awesome to have so much selection, but it's one of those situations where sometimes you feel like you have too much choice, you know? Okay. So I've mixed up, as you can see on the palette, like this nice dark forest green. I blot that on my paper towel. And I'm going to go into the little details that I created and just put some more layers in. So these little buds. Just creating some depth to the stem. It does not have to be perfect, again, because we're going to let this dry once we go ahead and add these details in. And we're going to go back in with a pen and really solidify these little changes that we're making. And while I'm at it, just to have my painting have the same kind of tones and all of it, I'm going to keep on with this green that I mixed up and start to add details to the stem of my flower in the middle. I'm going to blot it real quick. I'm just adding kind of like shading. Most plant life, depending on where the light source is coming from. Now, creating light source is a whole nother issue that we'll go over in the landscape class, but we're kind of just imagining that the light is coming from one particular place in all of these paintings. And in our case, it's imaginary. We're not painting from life or in plein air, so there's no pressure to make it look exactly like it would if this were a bloom that you were seeing in the wild, so to speak. Or just letting the watercolor do the work for us to create tonal differences and some detail. I'll go ahead and rinse my brush. I'm going to refresh that indigo purple that I mixed up earlier, and I'm going to add some deeper blue to it. Ooh, girl, look at this blue. Hold on, I gotta show you this blue. It's like a cobalt blue. That's crazy. It's too much blue, but it's pretty. Sometimes you just kind of have to see what you mix up and acknowledge that it's pretty. Ooh, now I've created a pretty dark purple, which I'm going to blot on my paper towel, of course, because it is very inky. She is thick. Okay. Now, these flowers are fun because you've created kind of like these wispy, stringy kind of shapes. Now you're going to pretend that you are in elementary school and you are drawing the petals on a flower. What I mean by that is you're going to start on one end and literally go around like that and create little flower petals on top of the dried paint that you had before. So I'm going to do that again at the top. I'm starting on the edge. Gotta think of not dragging my hand over my paper. And one more time for this guy over here. I'm using the very tippy tip of my brush and get these really good, clean lines mixed with the texture that you created earlier. Maybe we have a random kind of indigo petal coming off here. And then drop a little bit of that color into the bottom. Wash your brush, give her a dab, more of a dab than I just did, and kind of work that color into your leaves by these little short upward strokes. Okay, so now we have a lot more definition in these particular flowers, which is going to intensify even more when we do the pen and ink. So we just have one more of these guys to go through. Now we're going to start from front to back rather than back to front. So what I mean there is we're going to start with this flower that's in the foreground here. And I'm going to pick up that same deep indigo that I mixed up. Again, whatever color you chose, just mix up a darker version of that, one that's more pigmented, meaning you're using less water, and use that one. And again, we're going to use the very tippy tip of our brush as a fly comes by and outline our petals like so. Maybe there's a couple of lines that come out there. Again, picking up more color and dabbing, starting from that center down. Again. All we're doing is outlining the work we've already done. And maybe get a little bit of that on the center of the flower. And you're going to do the exact same thing with this guy in the background. I think I'm going to use a little bit of a more saturated look for this one. So outline. These guys are easy because they're hidden. Rotate your paper if you need to. Don't try to be a hero. I'm just adding some detail and lines. And a little bit to the center here. And that's going to make sense in a minute. We're going to darken up those centers. For now, I'm going to wash my brush and blotter. Let's check our time. Awesome. We have good. And I'm just going to add a little bit of brown to these centers on the bottom part like that. So we get more of a mustardy color. Help blend by using these little teeny circles. Maybe refresh that yellow up top. Let it bleed in a little bit. Those little spikies that we created earlier. Okie dokie. Okay, now is where your pen comes in. What did I do with mine? Here it is. I'm using this Sharpie gel pen, but I have micron pens, which I use from time to time as well. I find that I'm just really tough on ink pens, so I tend to use something that's a bit more sturdy, I guess. Not that those art pens are not sturdy, they're great pens, they really are. You can do such delicate work with them, but this is just a personal preference for me when doing illustrative florals like this. So I'm going to go back to the first flower that we did and just start to add details by adding lines. So I'm following the shape that I already created. I'm doing kind of the same brush stroke, but this is a pen stroke. And then at the top, I'm kind of squaring them off because we're going to imagine that this is kind of a square shaped petal. And I'm going to do that all around. And I'm going quickly just for time purposes, but please do not feel the need to rush yourself through this. Once I'm gone, you will be able to continue to add details on your own. Trust me, you can do it. This is easy. I have faith in all of you. You can totally achieve this. So I've got some more detail on the flowers. I'm going to start from the bottom and I'm going to add a little bit of shading just by doing small upward strokes that all originate from the bottom of the flower, like so. So you can see it looks much darker at the bottom. And I'm going to do that for all of these. You can get messy and doodle, because this is where the painting really becomes your own, where you can put your mark on it. And as far as leaves go, they are fun because you get to just outline them. You don't necessarily need to outline the entire stem, but if you want to, go for it. but I'm just kind of going through and occasionally adding some lines down the center. And this is just like a little trick that brings these nice, loose, invented flowers kind of to life a bit. And they really do look very pretty and graphic. And of course, you can create these in any color scheme that you'd like. So I'm doing quick strokes all the way down like so. You can even add a couple more spiky little details with just some strokes from your pen like so. So you have one down. Go. So again, I'm going to go in here and like I'm in elementary school. I'm drawing individual petals. Let's see that. I'll bring it a little closer. Outlining the bottom, adding some lines, and then just following my stem down with my pen. Now we can add some more detail to this guy here just by doing that. Okay, so I'll show you how you can make an accident work for you. Sometimes flowers have these kinds of things coming out of them. What are these called? It's like the male part of the flower. What I meant to do is just add some of that shading at the bottom like we did in the first one. But maybe this is for the best. That's the beauty of not painting from nature. There we go. We'll just add a couple more of those guys in there. That's actually more interesting. Now this is really an opportunity to follow your instincts and really go crazy, like doodle-wise, when it comes to adding these details to your watercolor paintings. And just for future reference, we'll be using a pen again in conjunction with our paints next week because we're going to be doing succulents. And I think that illustrative quality really just makes these like Pinterest worthy in the end. Now I'm only going to highlight one side of that, of the stem. Let's see that, I'll bring it closer. Only one side of my stem is highlighted. I'm not worried about staying in lines. I'm keeping it loose. I'm keeping it easy. There's my alarm. I don't see a lot of questions in the queue, so I'm just going to do this one and then I'll answer your questions. So I'm going to outline these petals. And I'll show you just one of those that I outlined like so. And instead of doing the shading near the top, near the bottom, we're doing it near the top on this one, because that's where our center is located. So I'm just doing these long lines. Okay. Now, the center of these flowers are really what makes them. So what you're going to do is you're going to do tiny little lines all around the outside of that center. Now near the bottom, you're going to scribble a bit. I know that seems like counterproductive, but trust me. Scribble a little bit, make it lighter near the top. And blend with the scratchy lines, and I'll show you that close up if my camera will focus. There we go. You can see that. And I'll do it one more time. So I'm doing little lines all around the outside, looking at the bottom, kind of scribbling, tight at the bottom, looser when you get toward the middle. Now, this is not a technique that most people use for shading. It's just something that I personally do, and I find that it works for me. If you want to do traditional cross-hatching or something of that nature, that's totally an option. I'm just kind of sharing the techniques that I use when I'm painting and illustrating. And you would go on like so. So I'm going to check the chat and see if there's anything to talk about. The white, pistils, how to get such rich tones and saturations in your color. Okay, so to get rich tones in your color, all you're gonna do is, let me X out of the chat here, is you're gonna go into your pan of watercolors and you're gonna wet your brush. You're gonna put a little bit of water down on your palette to start with. And I'm gonna pick this hot pink, and I'm really scrubbing. When I say scrub, I mean like you think you're destroying your brush, scrubbing into that guy to get the pigment onto my brush. And then I'm adding it to my palette. You can see it there. So instead of adding more water, my brush is still wet, but I went back to that same pan of color and I'm continuing to scrub that guy. I'm not being nice. You'll see most people's watercolors are not kept pristine. They look like a child like threw them across the room and played with them for 3 hours. Like they are a hot mess. The messier your palette looks, like you're doing it right. So just for demonstration purposes, you can see now if I go, this was another Snapdragon, but if I go directly to my scrap here, without blotting, without diluting, my color looks like that. Now, if I blot my color, there's a significant difference in tone. Now, another option is to just barely wet your brush. And I get an even lighter tonal difference here. I'm not really drawing anything in particular here or painting anything in particular. So now I have kind of like a gradient. And if I want to add detail or darken any edge, all I do is take the wet paint, plop it in, blot my brush, and then work in those little circles using the tip of my brush to incorporate the color. Now, this is something you have to play around with for sure, but it is something that's easily accomplished with just a bit of practice, just like with anything. Now, we've got a couple more questions left, a couple more minutes left. Feel free to ask any questions live. Otherwise, I'm just going to continue to add details to my flowers. You can go ahead and unmute and ask questions while I draw if you'd like. If you don't have any questions, that's fine too. Yeah.
Hi, sometimes your hand seems to be almost blocking your camera angle.
Okay.
When you were doing the peachy colored ones, I only got to see what you were doing after you moved your hand. Just FYI, okay. It was all good, but sometimes that was harder.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I hold my pen weird, so that is probably what the issue is, but I will be sure to be more cognizant of that moving forward. Anything else? No? Okay.
Much life the pen gives to the pieces.
Yeah, it really adds that extra something. Like it like really elevates it because we are doing these not necessarily from nature kind of things. So something so simple as a black pen really can make a huge difference. And it's obviously still watercolor, right? Like it doesn't look like a straight up drawing, but I find especially for beginning watercolor painters, this illustrative kind of style is far less intimidating than a realistic one, but it still lets you get a handle on controlling the paint, which is honestly one of the hardest parts of watercolor. So there you can see all together my 3 wildflowers. So if there aren't any more questions, I know
This was
that
really awesome, Jen.
Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. If you have any more questions, I can be contacted through the UART webpage. It's uart.tamu.edu. That's UART. And if you go on the staff section, I'm in there, Jen Korolenko. Like for the most Russian name you can find, there I am. And then you can reach me through there. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have moving forward. As well as requests, because next week we're going to do succulents, so we'll do some plain green ones and some flowering ones as well. I like to do a few different variations on the topics that we're doing. And if you're interested in getting a video of this particular tutorial, you can contact Abby or Flourish. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, then. Thank you so, so much, everybody, for coming and painting with me. And I hope you all have a beautiful evening and come back and see us next week at 5 o'clock.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. It was great.
Thank you so much. I really enjoy these.
Thank you, Jen.
Thanks, Jen. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a good weekend, everybody. I know it's Thursday, but like, what's the difference? Time doesn't matter anymore. So
Bye.
It's Friday Eve. It's Friday Eve.
It's Friday Eve. Yes. Go enjoy. All right. Good night, everybody. Bye.